قال المؤلف رحمه الله, said the author, may Allah have mercy upon him. وقال العلامة البياضي الحنفي في إشارات المرام. The savant Al-Bayadi, the Hanafi, said in his book إشارات المرام ممزوجا بالمتن, he said, merging his explanation with the source text, the original text, which is the text of Abu Hanifah. Isharatul Maram is a book in Aqidah, and Al-Bayadi, he cites the statements of Abu Hanifah and explains them from various books of his, from various books of Abu Hanifah. So if I just give you what Abu Hanifah said really quick first. Abu Hanifah said, كان الله تعالى ولا مكان. God was, exalted is He, and there was no place. كان قبل أن يخلق الخلق. He was before creating the creation. كان ولم يكن أين. He was, and there was nowhere. ولا خلق ولا شيء. And there was no creation, and there was nothing. وهو خالق كل شيء. And He is the creator of everything. So that's Abu Hanifa's statement. So Al-Bayadi says, and he has prior talk, and so he says, starting with our excerpt here, Al-Khamis, the fifth, yani there were some things he said before, is Ma ashara ilayhi, what Abu Hanifa signaled to. وقال في الفقه الأبسط, in his book الفقه الأبسط, كان الله تعالى ولا مكان. Allah Ta'ala was, and there was no place. كان قبل أن يخلق الخلق. He was before creating the creation. كان ولم يكن أين. He was, and there was nowhere. أي مكان, meaning no place. ولا خلق ولا شيء. And there was no creation, nor anything. وهو خالق كل شيء. And He is creator of everything. مُوجِدٌ لَهُ بَعْدَ الْعَدَمِ, one who brings it into existence after non-existence. فَلَا يَكُونُ شَيْءٌ مِّنَ الْمَكَانِ وَالْجِهَةِ قَدِيمًا, and therefore nothing of place or direction is eternal. وَفِيهِ إِشَارَاتٍ, in that there are signals. The first, so this is the first signal he wants to give us under the fifth point that he's making. الاستدلال بأنه تعالى لو كان في مكان وجهة is proving that He, exalted is He, had He been in a place or direction. لازم قدمهما. So it's written here, لازم قدمهما with fatha. I don't see how it's right though. If that's right, then I'm mistaken here. لَزِمَ قِدَمُهُمَا, then their eternality would be eternal. The eternality of place and direction would be eternal. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ تَعَالَى جِسْمًا, and it would be binding that He, the exalted, would be a body. So the first signal to, the first thing Abu Hanifa signals to in this quote of his is the signal to that had He been in a place or a direction, had Allah been in a place or a direction, لَزِمَ قِدَمُهُمَا, then the place and the direction would have been eternal. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ تَعَالَى جِسْمًا, and we'll say the place and direction would have been eternal. It would be binding that the place and the direction would be eternal. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ تَعَالَى جِسْمًا, and that He, the exalted, it would be binding that He be a body. لِأَنَّ الْمَكَانَ هُوَ الْفَرَاغُ الَّذِي يَشْغَلُهُ الْجِسْمُ, because place is the void occupied by a body. It is the space or the emptiness occupied by a body. وَالْجِهَةُ اسْمٌ لِمُنْتَهَى مَأْخَذِ الْإِشَارَةِ, and direction is what you call the extent of the place of pointing. وَمَقْصِدِ الْمُتَحَرِّكِ, and the direction is the destination of something that has a trajectory. فَلَا يَكُونَانِ إِلَّا لِلْجِسْمِ وَالْجِسْمَانِي. So therefore, place and direction would not be but for a body and for what is bodily or corporeal. وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ مُسْتَحِيلٌ. And all of that is impossible. كَمَا مَرَّ بَيَانُهُ. As previously clarified. وَإِلَيْهِ أَشَارَ. To that, Abu Hanifa signaled بِقَوْلِهِ by saying, كَانَ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ أَيْنٍ. He was, and there was nowhere. وَلَا خَلْقٌ وَلَا شَيْءٍ. And there was no creation, and there was no creation, and there was nothing. وَهُوَ خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And he is creator of everything. وَبَطَلَ مَا ظَنَّهُ ابْنُ تَيْمِيَّةَ مِنْهُمْ. And so, debunked is what Ibn Taymiyyah amongst those types of people thought. Those types of people who are God comparers. That's what Al-Bayadi said about Ibn Taymiyyah. So debunked is what Ibn Taymiyyah amongst those types of people thought. Min qidam al-arsh, that the arsh is eternal. But we know that Ibn Taymiyyah thought that the arsh was eternal by kind and not itself. Not that the arsh itself was eternal, but that the arsh as a kind of thing is eternal. He means that this arsh, which is the ceiling of paradise, before it there was another one, and before it there was another one, and before it there was another one forever into the past. كما في شرح العضدية, just as it is documented in the explanation of Al-Adudiyah, as it is documented about Ibn Taymiyyah in the explanation of Al-Adudiyah. الثانية, the second signal. الجواب بألا يكون البارئ تعالى داخل العالم لامتناع أن يكون الخالق داخلا في الأشياء المخلوقة. The second is the answer to يقول الثانية الجواب بألا يكون البارئ تعالى داخل العالم لامتناع أن يكون الخالق داخلا في الأشياء المخلوقة ولا خارجا عنه بأن يكون في جهة منه لوجوده تعالى قبل خلق المخلوقات. Okay. And the second is the answer to that the originator would not be inside of the world. لامتناع أن يكون الخالق داخلا في الأشياء المخلوقة. Because of the impossibility of the creator being inside of created things. ولا خارجا عنه. Nor would he be outside of the world. بأن يكون في جهة منه. By being in a direction from it. لوجوده تعالى قبل خلق المخلوقات. Because of his existence before the creation of created beings or created things. Exalted is he. وتحقق الأمكنة والجهات. And because of his existence before the verification of places and directions. وإليه أشار بقوله. And to that Abu Hanifa signaled by saying, هو خالق كل شيء. He is creator of everything. وهو خروج عن الموهوم دون المعقول. And this is departing delusion, not departing what's rational. It's not departing what's the intellect. Saying God is not inside of the world nor outside of the world. This is departing delusion, not departing the mind altogether. الثالثة الجواب بأن كون القائم بنفسه هو المتحيز بالذات غير مسلم. And the third thing is the response to the claim that the self-existing one is the one who is self-contained. Self-existing means self-contained. And this is not granted. غير مسلم. This is not granted. We don't submit to that. بل هو المستغني عن محل يقوم به. Rather, God being the self-existent one means the one who is clear of needing a spot to be in. كما في شرح المواقف. Like what's in the explanation of Al-Mawaqif. وإليه لوح بقوله. And that's what he clarified by saying, Kan Allahu wala makan. God was, and there was no place. السادس ما أشار إليه بقوله فيه. And now he wants to talk about the sixth point. Yani, so what did he do? He had some prior talk that we didn't extract from his book. We started from his fifth point, Al-Khamis. Under this fifth point, he made 3 points. Now, he made his 3 points. Now he's going to the sixth point. And he says, As-sadis ma ashara ilayhi biqawlihi fihi. It is what Abu Hanifa signaled to by saying therein, yani by saying in that book of his, وَأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى يُدْعَى مِنْ أَعْلَى. I'm just going to read Abu Hanifa's quote first, because Al-Bayabli's talk is weaved in between the statements of Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa said, وَأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى يُدْعَى مِنْ أَعْلَى. And that he, exalted is he, is called by using expressions of highness. La min asfal. He is not called upon by using expressions of lowness. You say, for example, oh, high one. You don't say, oh, low one. He says, Abu Hanifa says, لِأَنَّ الْأَسْفَلَ لَيْسَ مِنْ وَصْفِ الرُّبُوبِيَّةِ وَالْأُلُوهِيَّةِ فِي شَيْءٍ. Because lowness is not amongst the descriptions of lordship and godhood in any way. وَعَلَيْهِ. And according to that, Abu Hanifa says, is مَا رُوِيَ فِي الْحَدِيثِ, is what was narrated in the hadith. أَنَّ رَجُلًا أَتَى إِلَى النَّبِيِّ, that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam بِأَمَةٍ سَوْدَاء, with a black slave woman. فقال, and he said, وَجَبَ عَلَيَّ عِتْقُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. It is incumbent on me to emancipate a believing slave. أَفَتُجْزِينِي هَذِهِ, is this one sufficient? فقال لها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. And so the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said to her, أَمُؤْمِنَةٌ أَنْتِ, a believer are you? A believing female are you? قالت نعم, she said yes. فقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. And so the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, said, Ain Allah. So if we translate it verbatim, it would come out as, where is God? فأشارت إلى السماء. And so she pointed to the sky. فقال أعتقها فإنها مؤمنة. And so he said, free her. Indeed, she is a believer. Intaha. End quote. So that's Abu Hanifa's quote. Yani Abu Hanifa wants to explain the hadith of the slave girl. So Al-Bayadli cites Abu Hanifa here, and he says, As-sadis, the sixth, is ma ashara ilayhi biqawlihi fihi, what Abu Hanifa pointed to by saying therein, yani in that book, وَأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى يُدْعَى مِنْ أَعْلَى, and that he, exalted is he, is called from above. That's a very literal translation. He is called from above. So the way I said it first was, he is called by using expressions of highness. لِلْإِشَارَةِ إِلَى مَا هُوَ وَصْفٌ لِلْمَدْعُوِّ تَعَالَى. As a signal, Al-Bayadli explains, as a signal to that which is the description of the called one. Exalted is he. Even when you say ta'ala, it means he went high, he ascended. That means he is exalted. So Abu Hanifa is saying these expressions are the expressions that are compatible with talking about God, describing God. من نعوت الجلال وصفات الكبرياء والألوهية والاستغناء. Because these words are the words that have the descriptions of greatness and awesomeness and godhood and absolute independence. La min asfal, he's not called by using expressions of lowness. لأن الأسفل أي الإشارة إليه, because lowness, meaning signaling to it, ليس من وصف الربوبية والألوهية, it is not a way to describe lordship and godhood, والكبرياء and awesomeness, والفوقية and highness, بالاستيلاء يعني highness by dominance, في شيء, in any way whatsoever. So he's talking about using words for God, words that mean highness as opposed to words that mean lowness. And he's not talking about an actual direction, because actually being in a physical direction is not in itself a merit. Being in any direction over another direction is not in itself a merit. And that's what we said before, because a Wahhabi is going to say he must be high because it's not befitting that he would be low. That's not what Abu Hanifah is talking about. Because the Wahhabi or any other likener of God, comparer of God to the creations, this argument for him is that God is physically in a direction, even if he doesn't use the word physical. What Abu Hanifah is talking about is words not being physically in a direction. He's explaining why use these words if God is not in any place, because these words have an indication of greatness. Look, if you had royalty, a king, and someone said, "Your Highness," is that confusing? That's not confusing for any person. When someone said about a king or a queen, "Your Highness," no one got confused. So the people who had right belief in God, when God was called something like Your Highness or His Highness, or when it was said that He has highness, it wasn't confusing for the people of true monotheism. It was only confusing for people who have paganistic tendencies. So they thought highness for God was a highness of a physical location, because they didn't know that God is not physical. Al-Bayadi says, فأشار إلى الجواب بأن رفع الأيدي عند الدعاء إلى جهة السماء ليس لكونه تعالى فوق السماوات العلى. Abu Hanifa signaled by this answer to the fact that lifting the hands when supplicating, lifting the hands to the direction of the sky when supplicating, is not for God being over the high skies. بل لكونها قبلة الدعاء. Rather, it's merely because the sky is the direction for the supplication. إذ منها يتوقع الخيرات, because from the sky the goodness is expected, which is the rain. وَيُسْتَنْزَلُ الْبَرَكَاتِ, and the blessings are sought to fall from the sky. لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, because God says, exalted is He, وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ, in the sky is your provision and what you have been promised. In the sky is your provision and what you have been promised. Here is a footnote. I'll just read it in English. In the tafsir of Al-Tabari and in other tafsirs, it is documented that the meaning of the ayah is the snow and the rain, because by those two, the earth brings out your sustenance, and the earth brings out your food, your staple, kutakum, that by which your bodies can stand. the food and the fruits and other than that. And that what's meant by sky in the ayah is the rain itself. وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ. In the sky is your provision. It means in the rain is your provision. Because that's where it comes from. That's where it falls from. And then he gives a line of poetry here that I'm not going to attempt. مع الإشارة إلى اتصافه تعالى بنعوت الجلال وصفات الكبرياء. Along with the signal to God's attributing or being attributed with the descriptions of greatness and the attributes of awesomeness. وكونه تعالى فوق عباده بالقهر والاستيلاء. And his being over his slaves by dominance and subjugation, exalted is he. Now, Al-Bayadi keeps using this word jawab, answer or response. It's not clear for me what's being answered. Why he keeps using this word answer? So that's a little bit what's slowing my translation down, because I want to understand something that's not clear for me. Maybe we need to see the book itself and find there's some context missing for us so that I can direct this translation better. He says, وَإِلَى الْجَوَابِ بِمَنْعِ حَمْلِ مَا وَرَدَ فِي الْآيَاتِ وَالْأَحَادِيثِ عَلَى الِاسْتِقْرَارِ وَالتَّمَكُّنِ. And Abu Hanifah, by this response, so that's how I'm translating it, by this response, maybe it needs better translation because something is missing for me. Abu Hanifa signaled to preventing, refraining from, taking what came in Quranic verses and prophetic hadiths to refer to dwelling and being situated in place. وَمَنْعِ رَفْعِ الْأَيْدِي لِاعْتِقَادِهِ. And preventing lifting the hands for this conviction. One should not raise his hands in supplication for this conviction because he believes God is above us. He should raise his hands in supplication because that's where the blessings descend from. بل كل ذلك بالمعنى الذي ذكرناها هنا. Rather, all of that is according to the meaning that we mentioned here. وهو الذي لا ينافي وصف الكبرياء. And that is the meaning that is not contrary to the description of awesomeness. ولا يتطرق إليه سمات الحدوث. And that is the meaning that for which the signs of createdness are not applicable. والفناء. And the signs of being finite. The createdness and the being finite are not applicable to these meanings that apply to God. كما أشار إليه بقوله. That's what Abu Hanifa signaled to when he said, وَعَلَيْهِ, meaning according to this. So Abu Hanifa, he established a premise. He said, God is called upon by using expressions of highness, not expressions of lowness, because expressions of lowness are not applicable, are not accommodating of greatness, of godhood and lordship. وعليه, and according to that, a يخرج على أنه يدعى من أعلى, meaning based on the fact that he is called upon from above. Yani, he is called upon by using expressions of highness. ويوصف بنعوت الجلال وصفات الكبرياء. And based on the fact that he is described with the attributes of greatness and the descriptions of awesomeness. ما روي في الحديث. This is how to explain what was reported in the hadith. أن رجل, that a man, وهو عمرو بن الشريد كما رواه أبو هريرة. And this man, his identity is Amr ibn Sharid, according to what Abu Hurairah narrated. وعبد ibn Rawaha, and according to what Abdullah ibn Rawaha narrated. Rahimahullah ta'ala. كما بينه الإمام في مسنده, as the Imam himself clarified in his Musnad. Abu Hanifah, he has a Musnad, a hadith book, even if he didn't compile it himself as a hadith book, but he has hadith narration, and his narration of hadith with his chains of narration were compiled, and that's published and available. I have a copy, mashallah. This is what Abu Hanifa has produced by his own chain of narration. بتخريج الحارثي وطلحة والبلخي والخوارزمي. According to the narration of Al-Harithi and Talha and Al-Balkhi and Al-Khwarizmi. So, Al-Bayadli, he's a Hanafi. And the Hanafis, they know their scholars. And they know the disciples of Abu Hanifa and his colleagues and those who narrate from his route. So for someone who's accustomed, who's familiar, acquainted with the Hanafi school, then these names are familiar for him. Just like the Shafi'is will say An-Nawawi and Al-Rafi'i and other words, even though these are closer to Abu Hanifa than An-Nawawi was to Ash-Shafi'i in time, I mean. Just trying to give you an example. Sometimes the book of the scholar, as you know, is narrated through different routes. So even the Muwatta of Malik, for example, there's versions of Muwatta that go back to some reporters from Malik, and other versions of Muwatta that go back to Malik through other reporters. So there's variances between the copies. This is what Al-Bayadli is saying here. He's saying, like what was narrated in a hadith, that a man who's identified as Amr ibn Sharid, according to Abu Hurairah and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, both are the companions, both of them are companions. Just as the Imam himself clarified in his own Musnad, according to the Musnad of Abu Hanifa, according to Al-Harithi and Talha and Al-Balkhi and Al-Khwarizmi. This man أتى إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بأمة سوداء. He came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam with a black slave woman. فقال, and then he said, وجب علي عتق رقبة مؤمنة. It is incumbent upon me to emancipate a believing neck, to free a believing neck. قال إن أمتي هلكت. The man was saying, my mother passed away. وأمرت أن أعتق عنها رقبة مؤمنة. And she commanded, she left a will that I would free on her behalf a believing neck. وَلَا أَمْلِكُ إِلَّا هَذِهِ. And I don't own any but this one. وَهِيَ جَارِيَةٌ سَوْدَاءُ أَعْجَمِيَّةٌ. She is a black slave woman who's not Arab. She's foreign woman. لَا تَدْرِي مَا الصَّلَاةُ. And she is not even knowledgeable. She doesn't even know what the salat is. أَفَتُجْزِينِي هَذِهِ. Is this one sufficient for me? Can I use this one to fulfill my mother's will? عَمَّا لَزِمَ بِالْوَصِيَّةِ. Is this one sufficient for what is binding by the will of my mother? كما في مصنف الحافظ عبد الرزاق. Al-Bayadli says, and that's in compliance with what is in the Musannaf of Hafiz Abdul Razzaq, rahimahullah. وَلَيْسَ فِي الرِّوَايَاتِ الصَّحِيحَةِ أَنَّهَا كَانَتْ خَرْسَاء. And there is no authentic version that this slave woman was mute. So that's an implication that there are narrations that she's mute, but none of them are authentic. Kama qil, as was said, that she was mute. But we might mention that sometimes just to add to the argument against the Wahhabi. In some narrations, she's mute. In some narrations, she can speak. In some narrations, the man is this one, Amr ibn Sharid. And in some narrations, it's another person. فَقَالَ لَهَا النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. And so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to her, أَمُؤْمِنَةٌ أَنْتِ? A believing female are you? قالت نعم. She said, yes. فقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. And so the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, said, أين Allah? So if we translate it as it appears, it would come out as, where is God? Al-Bayaldi clarifies though. He says, سائلا عن المنزلة, asking about the status. والعلوي, and asking about the highness, which is the majesty. وَالْعُلُوِّ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ عُلُوَ الْقَهْرِ وَالْغَلَبَةِ, and asking about the highness over the slaves, which is the highness of dominance and conquering. So that's Al-Bayaldi elaborating, and he's saying with more words what Abu Hanifa is already saying. That's Abu Hanifa's point. That's why Abu Hanifa made the introduction. He said, God Almighty is called upon by using expressions of highness, not expressions of lowness, because expressions of lowness do not serve the meaning of lordship and godhood in any way. And so according to that is this hadith where the Prophet said, Ain Allah, and then she signaled to the sky. So when he said, Ain Allah, he wasn't asking about a place. So Al-Bayaldi says, Sa'ilan anil manzila, asking about the status. Yes. So here, it's not explicit statement. Saying Ain Allah in Arabic, that's not an explicit statement in Arabic. And someone might claim that if you said in English, where is God? That's an explicit statement in English. I would disagree with them. But we don't talk like that. Because just like Aina in Arabic refers to the status, and that's why it's not explicit, because it has more than one meaning, where in English also refers to the status. So why would it be explicit when it has more than one meaning? But if it's permissible to use that in another language or not, that's another thing. I'm only saying it's not explicit. I'm not saying it's permissible to use it. So what's the rule when it comes to non-explicit statement meaning? In one way, you could take it as blasphemy, but in another way, it could be not taken as blasphemy. The rule is you cannot deem a person as a kafir unless you know that he meant the blasphemous meaning. وَمُشِيرًا أَنَّهُ إِذَا دَعَاهُ الْعِبَادُ اسْتَقْبَلُوا السَّمَاءَ. And his question, Al-Bayaldi is saying, the Prophet's question, according to this narration, and he's not even saying that this is the question that the Prophet really asked her. He's just addressing the narration that came. According to this narration, if it were authentic, then it needs to comply with everything else. So, by asking this question, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is signaling to the fact that when the slaves call upon God, they direct themselves to the sky. Duna zahirihi min al-jiha. And he's not signaling to what seems to be the issue of the hadith, which is a direction. That seeming meaning is what the one with paganistic tendencies wants. ثم قال, and then he said, فأشارت إلى السماء. So she pointed to the sky. Yani that's her response to the Prophet's question, according to this rendition. إشارة إلى أعلى المنازل. This pointing was pointing to the highest of statuses. Pointing to the highest of statuses, not pointing to a physical location. كما يقال, just like it could be said, فلان في السماء, so-and-so is in the sky. أي رفيع القدر جدا, meaning he has very high status. كما في التقديس للرازي, like what's in التقديس by Al-Razi. أساس التقديس. This is just a booklet. Also, I have a copy of this. I would love to take it by talaqi. I ask Allah Ta'ala to enable me. Probably I have ijazah in it because of having ijazah to narrate all of what the Shaykh narrates. But that book, a book like that, is not to be taken lightly, despite its small size. This was the book that enraged Ibn Taymiyyah, Asasul Taqdees. This little booklet. It enraged Ibn Taymiyyah and drove him to write a multi-volumed book that has almost every page has kufr in it. Yani, he became unhinged. Ibn Taymiyyah went unhinged because of this book. فقال, and so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said by her answer, after she answered his question by a signal, not by a word, according to this rendition, أعتقها, free her, فإنها مؤمنة, she is indeed a believer. انتهى, end quote. ثم قال, and then Al-Bayadwi said, فأشار إلى الجواب بأن السؤال والتقدير لا يدلان على المكان بالجهة. Abu Hanifah signaled to the answer that the question, which was Ain Allah, and the acceptance, the verification, yani, the Prophet not objecting to her. He asked her, according to this rendition, Ain Allah. She pointed to the sky, and he didn't say, no, you're wrong. So Abu Hanifa signaled to this question, Ain Allah, and the Prophet's tacit approval, or his approval, yani, because he said, wasn't tacit, yani, means, tacit means implied or not stated. His approval, Abu Hanifa signaled to that this question and approval do not prove a place by a direction. It's not a place by a direction. What's at hand here is not a place by a direction. Rather, it's a place by status. Let's stop here. It's a place that means status. Because you say, which place is he in? What place am I in? It means, what's my status? What's my ranking? لمنع البراهين اليقينية عن حقيقة العينية. Because of the definitive arguments that defy God being in a real location. Intaha, end quote. ثم قال البياضي, then Al-Bayadwi said, الرابعة, the fourth. So what's this fourth here? We need to look into his book to see what's going on with his numbering, because these are excerpts taken out. So we already started with the fifth, and then he said under number 5, 1, 2, 3, and then he said the sixth, and then he said whatever he said. Now it says here the fourth. So we need to see what's going on in the book. أنه عليه الصلاة والسلام أراد امتحانها. So it looks like what he's saying here is, he says here, السادس, the sixth thing. Then under the sixth, he started giving points just like he did for the fifth. But we skipped 1, 2, and 3 and went right to 4. So it says, ثم قال البياضي, then he said, الرابعة, the fourth, أنه عليه الصلاة والسلام أراد امتحانها, is that he, may peace and blessings be upon him, wanted to test her. هل تقر بأن الخالق الفعال المتعالي هو الله? Does she confess that the creator and the doer of much and the high majestic one, he is God, Allah, الذي إذا دعاه الداعي استقبل السماء, God whom when the caller calls upon him, when the supplicant supplicates to him, he directs himself to the sky. كما دل السؤال والتقرير, as proven by the question and proven by the approval. Prophet was testing her. كما في شرح مسلم للنووي, like what's in the explanation of Sahih Muslim by An-Nawawi. Yes, An-Nawawi said that. An-Nawawi said he wanted to test her, although he was dealing with a different version of the hadith. وإليه أشار بترتيب التخريج على أنه يدعى من أعلى لا من أسفل. That sentence I'm not really sure how to translate it. So this is Al-Bayadli also saying, like we say, and like Al-Kawthari said, and like Al-Ghumari said, that all of these versions are about the same incident. When the Wahhabis are faced with the various conflicting versions, the conflicts in the versions of this hadith, they say, and not just them, also God comparers before them in history, they said, it's more than one story. The scholar said, it's not more than one story. It's the same story, but the hadith is disordered. Al-Khamisa, and the fifth point, أنها كانت أعجمية, is that she was a foreign woman. لا تقدر أن تفصح عما في ضميرها. She was unable to eloquently, to clearly elaborate about what she has in her heart. من اعتقاد التوحيد بالعبارة. She wasn't able to clearly and eloquently express her conviction in monotheism in words. فَتُعَرِّفُ بِالْإِشَارَةِ أَنَّ مَعْبُودَهَا إِلَهُ السَّمَاءِ. So she made it known by a signal that whom she worships is the God of the sky. فَإِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يُسَمُّونَ اللَّهَ إِلَهَ السَّمَاءِ, because back in the day they used to call Allah God of the sky. Doesn't mean he's in the sky. Even the old Arabs, they used to believe that Allah was the one who created heavens and earth. They worshipped idols. And if you were to ask them who created the heavens, they would say Allah. كما دل السؤال والاكتفاء بتلك الإشارة. As proven by the question. When he said, Ain Allah, this question proves this point. والاكتفاء بتلك الإشارة. And as proven by sufficing with the signal. كما في الكفاية لنور الدين البخاري. Like what's documented in Al-Kifaya by Nuruddin al-Bukhari, not Imam al-Bukhari, another person. ثم قال البياضي, and then al-Bayadi said, فقال فيه, and so Abu Hanifa said therein, فمن قال لا أعرف ربي أفي السماء أم في الأرض فهو كافر. So anyone who says, I do not know. So this translation could go two ways. It could be translated as, whoever says, I do not know my Lord, is he in the sky or is he on earth? Then he's a kafir. Or you could translate it this way. Whoever said, I do not know my Lord, is he in the sky or is he on earth? Then he is a kafir. This is another statement a Wahhabi will disingenuously bring to you. So you have two types of Wahhabis here. The one who knows what's in Al-Fiqh al-Absat, who knows that Abu Hanifa explicitly said, Kan Allahu wala makan. Allah existed and there was no place. And he'll still bring you this statement. He's saying, according to him, well, Abu Hanifa, he wants to trick you, that is. Because he knows what Abu Hanifa says. So he wants to trick you by bringing you this excerpt that Abu Hanifa said, whoever said, I do not know my Lord, is he in the sky or is he on earth? Then he's a kafir. And the Wahhabi wants to say, therefore, he's in the sky. Because if you don't know he's in the sky, then you're a kafir. And that's not what Abu Hanifa is saying. And then you have another type of Wahhabi who doesn't know. He may not even be able to read any Arabic. And he has a translation given to him by his rotten Shaykh. And then he goes and he gives it to you. It's like what they do with the Aqidat of Al-Tahawi. Wahhabi will tell you, look what Tahawi said. Al-Tahawi said, وَفَوْقَهُ, Allah is over everything. And he knows that Al-Tahawi said in the other place, the six directions do not contain him. لِكَوْنِهِ قَائِلًا بِاخْتِصَاصِ الْبَارِئِ بِجِهَةٍ وَحَيِّزٍ. Al-Bayadi explains. The reason Abu Hanifa is saying that this person is a kafir, because he is saying that the originator is in some particular direction and has containment. وكل ما هو مختص بالجهة والحيز فإنه محتاج محدث بالضرورة. And everything that is specified to a direction and containment, then it is needy and it is a creation necessarily. فهو قول بالنقص الصريح في حقه تعالى. And so saying so is explicit statement of deficiency for God. Exalted is He. كذا من قال إنه على العرش ولا أدري العرش أفي السماء أم في الأرض. Abu Hanifah said, and likewise, whoever said, indeed, He is over the arsh, but I don't know. Is the arsh in the sky or is it on the earth? لاستلزامه القول باختصاصه تعالى بالجهة والحيز. يعني for the same reason. Al-Bayadi explains. It's for the same reason, because one would be committing to saying that God is in a particular direction and has a containment. وَالنَّقْصِ الصَّرِيحِ فِي شَأْنِهِ, and he is committing to an explicit expression of deficiency for God. سيما في القول بالكون في الأرض ونفي العلو عنه تعالى, especially by saying that he's on earth and negating highness from God. Exalted is he. بل نفي ذات الإله المنزه عن التحيز ومشابهة الأشياء. In fact, this is a denial of God's existence, the one who is exalted from containment and exalted from comparison to things. وفيه إشارات, and in that there are signals. Al-Ula, the first of them is أن القائل بالجسمية والجهة منكر وجود موجود سوى الأشياء التي يمكن الإشارة إليها حسا. The first is that the one who believes in corporeality, the one who believes in anthropomorphism, is a denier of the existence of any existent one other than something that could be pointed to physically. This corporealist and anthropomorphist, this bodifier of God, he denies the existence of anything that can't be pointed to physically. فَهُمْ مُنْكِرُونَ لِذَاتِ الْإِلَهِ, so they are therefore deniers of God's self. Al-Munazzahi an dhalik, that self that is exalted from such imperfection. فَلَزِمَهُمُ الْكُفْرُ لَا مَحَالَةً, and so blasphemy is bound to them, most indubitably.